Welcome to the BeWell Network program. My name is Dr. Ted Bender. I'm a clinical psychologist and the CEO of the BeWell Network. If you or a loved one is struggling, please visit BeWellRecovery.com. My goal in this program is to educate people and to help many understand that they are not alone. There is help for the many life obstacles we endure. Today is my great pleasure to have Dr. Dvorak as our guest. We're going to be speaking today about addiction and addiction-related research. Dr. Dvorak is a clinical psychologist that specializes in addiction. Dr. Dvorak is also an associate professor in clinical psychology at the University of Central Florida. He earned his bachelor's degree in sociology from Northern State University and his PhD in clinical psychology from the University of South Dakota. He also completed his predoctoral residency program at Brown University. His research interests include examining the role of cognitive, affective, and behavioral self-regulation in health-compromising behaviors, assessing factors associated with health-compromising behaviors in real time through experience sampling methodology, and developing mobile and web-based interventions to reduce involvement in health-compromising behaviors. Dr. Dvorak, your work suggests that most risky behavior involves strong internal drives. Can you tell us a little bit about how that affects substance use behavior specifically?
Yeah, sure. Going back, probably going all the way back to, ancient times, there's always been this notion that we have these kind of two competing processes that are occurring that drive us to engage in certain types of behaviors. And one of those processes is kind of future-oriented, very goal-driven types of control processes. And the other is this more hedonic, emotional and kind of implicit and automatic processes. And a lot of that emotional and automatic processes are what we find that gets folks into trouble when it comes with addictive problems or substance use problems. And so a lot of my research is focused on that piece of it, at least the etiological side has. The problems occur when those two systems get out of balance. And so we've looked at, kind of negative emotion and how negative emotion leads to more problematic use patterns, and positive emotion. When positive emotion gets dysregulated, it can lead to all kinds of problematic use patterns, especially in the young kids that I tend to work with. I do most of my work with college students or young adults. And so we see a lot of substance use in that population, driven by strong appetitive kind of hedonic drives, like seeking positive mood, positive emotion. And so a lot of the stuff that we've done is just trying to look at the ways in which kind of cognitive factors like our attention or our implicit control or our effortful control interact with our emotions in order to increase or reduce problematic substance use.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think, a lot of people know, or at least kind of feel like they understand how negative emotions can lead to problematic substance use disorder. But you mentioned positive emotions and how they can get out of control and lead to similar results. Can you talk a little bit more about that for our listeners?
Yeah, so we actually got a recent paper that's been looking at this quite a bit. So we assessed people's kind of attention bias to alcohol-related cues. So using their smartphone, several times a day, they would assess how happy they're feeling, how excited they're feeling, how energetic they're feeling. They'd also we'd ask them how sad or how anxious they're feeling as well. And then we did this task where two different pictures pop up and they respond to these pictures. And one is a picture of alcohol and one is a picture of non-alcohol. And it's a way for us to assess if their attention is drawn to the alcohol pictures or not. And what we find is that in both men and women, in the moment, when their mood is more positive, their attention gets drawn to those alcohol pictures. And as it gets drawn to those alcohol pictures, we see that their drug craving is going up quite a bit. There's a strong relationship between those two things. So as positive mood goes up, the kind of attentional focus to alcohol stimuli and the craving that we have for alcohol seems to go up as well. It's pretty interesting. You mentioned negative affect. And we just finished a study, it's actually been a couple of years ago, that looked at this because I think we all kind of know that negative mood leads to substance use. And it's interesting that a lot of the research shows that that's not always the case. It's far more complex than what we think. And what we found was that while positive mood again consistently led to drinking, negative mood didn't. And in fact, negative mood was lower on drinking days even before the person started drinking. So if you looked at it after they started drinking on drinking days versus non, it looks like their negative mood is really low, but it was always that way. What we did find is this really interesting relationship where people's emotional instability starts getting higher and higher right before they drink, and then it just drops right after they start. And so something seems to be happening where it's not necessarily the kind of tonic negative mood, but the fluctuations, the roller coaster of negative mood that we go on that leads to drinking.
Very interesting.
At least in this population.
Yeah, that's very fascinating. It leads me into the next topic I wanted to discuss with you, harm reduction. So I can tell you, as a clinician and as a grad student, many years ago, probably going all the way back to 2004 or so, in one of the thousands of journal articles we had to read in grad school, I was reading about harm reduction. I guess it might have been 2005. And it was some of the research coming out of Nova Southeastern, the Sobels. You're probably very familiar with their work. And I remember thinking at the time, and being completely honest, that I almost just laughed it off and threw it aside. And I never forget that moment, because then I had this, later on I had a thought. I was like, well, you know what? This is peer-reviewed, published study. It's been vetted. It's been carefully conducted. And maybe there's something to this. Fast forward to 2022, we know that there's been a ton of research to support this, especially in a world where it just seems like no matter what we do or no matter how hard we try, we're losing more and more people to substance use disorders every single year, with the overdose death rate spiking to 106,000 in a 12-month rolling period, the highest we've ever seen. So for people who are out there listening, can you talk a little bit about what harm reduction approach really means?
Yeah, so harm reduction is, it's interesting. It's founded in this idea of kindness and compassion and caring. And it's underpinned by like several key principles. And the principles are consistent with both the concepts of social justice, but also with healthcare professionals' kind of foundational responsibilities, values, codes of ethics, codes of conduct, and standards of practice. But the basic idea is that people are going to use substances as part of our culture. It's part of who we are, whether this is alcohol, which is legal, or cannabis, which is sort of legal, or other kind of more illicit substances. And instead of trying to shame these folks or engage them in some sort of treatment that doesn't kind of meet them where they're at, a harm reduction approach says, look, we're not so concerned with the use aspect. Yes, it's problematic. Substance use is devastating, but what can we do to reduce the impact on your life? What can we do to reduce the harm? What can we do to make this? And this doesn't necessarily mean complete abstinence, but it grew out of this idea that these complete abstinence models were pushing people to collect up time, right? And as they collected up time, the notion is that we run into high-risk situations. And if we can't effectively cope or engage our kind of self-control in those situations, we have a relapse. And when that happens, this cognitive component called the abstinence violation effect kicks in. And like they say, when you fall off the wagon, you fall hard. And the harm reduction approach has really been a way to reduce the abstinence violation effect, teach people to use in kind of more responsible or less harming ways. And oftentimes what we see is that when people are given that opportunity, their abstinence is more effective anyway. So yeah, it's a very, very effective approach. It's a very person-centered approach, and it's definitely it's the type of approach that I use in my work. So.
I saw an article recently, I think it just came out. I can't remember which journal it was in, but it was talking about using, I believe, Suboxone or Subutex maintenance in military populations. Are you familiar with the study that just came out, which showed a significant reduction in suicidality?
I'm not familiar with it. I need to check it out. This sounds like a great study.
Yeah, I'll if you remind me, I can try to find it and send it to you. But basically what it was showing was, harm reduction model. Again, instead of just cold abstinence from opioids or whatever the drug of choice was, these drugs that we have in our toolkit which are designed to really prevent overdose death and maintain a better quality of life, are showing dramatic and significant effects on long-term effects of suicidality or risk of suicide, which I thought was pretty fascinating. And these drugs that I'm talking about, Suboxone, Subutex, more people are more commonly know of methadone, are part of the harm reduction model. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it is. In fact, yes. So the the initial kind of harm reduction approach started with these types of drugs, right? These kind of safe injection sites, places where they can reduce HIV. And I believe the first kind of authorized safe injection site was in New York City just a few years ago. It was authorized, and there's been some road bumps getting more up and going for a couple of reasons. COVID is one. The other is that there has been, while states may legalize these, they're still federally not legal, though mostly just not enforced. So, yeah.
Your current work also involves technology, specifically building an adaptive mobile intervention for promoting safe drinking strategies. How did you come up with that? How does it work? Tell our listeners a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I've always been really interested in using technology for these things, and the stuff that I'm doing right now is with college students, and college students are going to drink, right? The goal here is to get them to do it more responsibly, and so we use this theory called deviance regulation. And what happens is, under this theory, the idea is that if you believe that a lot of people are engaging in a behavior that's a negative behavior, and I tell you that there's just a few people that don't, and those people are really awesome, then you will think that you can, if you be one of those few people, you can stand out in this really awesome way, right? And the opposite is true too. If you think that nobody's engaging in this type of behavior, like let's say using safe drinking strategies. If you think nobody's using safe drinking strategies, and I can just say, yeah, you're right, nobody uses those safe drinking strategies, but there's a small group that does, and they're really awesome, right? Then you increase your use of safe drinking strategies. If you think everybody's using them, I'll say, you're right, there's a small group that doesn't, and they're really terrible, or, like, here's all of the problems that they experience, and it pushes you to use more in order to not fall into that group. The idea is stand out when you can, fit in when you must. And so what we've done is we assess people throughout the day, and when they report that we're drinking, we say, how many people are using those safe drinking strategies where you're at? And if it's the majority, we give them one sort of tailored message about those strategies. If it's the minority, we give them another tailored message in order to increase their safe drinking in the moment while they're drinking with their friends.
Did you find, or have you found in any of these studies, that simply monitoring their drinking behaviors reduced the amount of drinking?
It does, yeah. So we see that in every EMA study that I do, that the longer a person is in the study, the less that they tend to drink. Yeah. So something about reporting how much you're drinking is important.
Agreed. It just, it seems like today in 2022, when we're talking about substance use and alcohol use disorders, the abstinence-only model is a bit antiquated. It's not that abstinence only isn't a good way to go, and for some people it may be the only way to go. But for other people, in my own practice, what I've run into is, the 22-year-old IV heroin user who's getting heroin that's laced with fentanyl, that's had 4 major overdose near-death experiences in the last year or two. For someone like that, just saying abstinence is the only way, in theory sounds great, but that might not actually be the best course of treatment for that person, because their risk of dying is so great that we have to use every tool we have in the toolbox, and it seems like harm reduction is an important piece of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of this, at the New York site, I think I was reading that they've had 4,000 overdoses, but not a single death. I mean, it's pretty impressive. So, yeah.
What can viewers do to improve self-control and self-regulation?
Yeah, this is a tough one. When I started doing research in self-control, my goal was like, let's find a way to build it up. And I tried all kinds of things, like tasks that people did on phones and other stuff, and nothing worked. There are some things that the research shows works. One is if you just focus on one goal at a time. I think people get overwhelmed and they pick too many goals. So taking one, focusing on that, building a habit, a routine around that goal, right, helps to build up that self-control. And I think it can generalize to other areas of your life. Recent research has shown that meditation can be pretty good about building up self-control. And it seems to have something to do with being kind of present and in the moment and collected. And then, just reminding yourself of the consequences that come with this. We have a recent study that just came out, I think, last week that looks at something called counterfactual thinking, where you think of a problem that you've had in the past, and then if you identify a solution, a safe drinking strategy or something to fix that problem if it were to, or to prevent that problem if it were to happen again in the future. We see more use of safe drinking strategies, lower alcohol use, lower problems just by doing that very simple intervention. But we also see that the effects of a person's impulsivity no longer is kind of as robust as it would be in predicting their alcohol use and problems into the future. So something about engaging in this notion of fixing my past consequences or reminding myself of them seems to have an effect on self-control.
Very interesting. As a psychologist, I'm often asked, what can we do to help focus on our own self-care? And in your research and your work with patients, what have you found to be effective for you personally?
So I'll say personally, what works for me to focus on my own self-care is time for myself. I love to run, and it's my time to myself. I will go out, and sometimes I'll run for I don't know, like a ridiculously long time, just to help relieve that kind of stress and tension. But I think everybody has to find their own thing. Exercise is obviously a great one,
yeah.
But sometimes it's spending time with family. Sometimes for some people, it's their job, right? Like they just love to do what they do, and that can be a great way for them to relax. So I think it varies.
I've seen some of your runs that you've posted on Facebook or social media before, and I just kind of have to wonder what happened to me where you're running like sub 8 miles. So I appreciate that. And I also, agree, self-care is really important. We've talked about this ad nauseum through the pandemic. But for myself, it's the same. I find that exercise, cardiovascular and weight training has been one of the things that really helped me get through a difficult pandemic, working with patients, as well as spending time with family and really carving out time for yourself in our busy and hectic lives. So I wanted to really thank you for coming on the show today, and I really appreciate your time. Where can people find you? Where can they go to find out about your research on social media or wherever their websites?
Yeah, so we're on Twitter at SUDSUSE, SUDSUSE. We post the research from our lab, but we also review all sorts of other research, just post short tweets about it. So you are more than welcome to follow us there. And that's about it. That's about our kind of presence on social media.
Thank you again, Dr. Dvorak, for speaking on the BeWell program today. To our listeners and viewers, please like and subscribe to our channel to stay informed. You are not alone. A better tomorrow is real. Until next time, I'm Dr. Bender. Be well.